What's up, everybody? Joe here, back in the studio with my partner in crime, Sunny, for another deep dive. Sunny, my friend, what's shaking?
Hey, Joe. Just trying to keep my head on straight with all the crazy stuff happening globally. It feels like every week there's a new plot twist, you know?
Totally. And that's why we're here, right? To try and make sense of the big picture and how it actually affects you, our awesome listener.
Exactly. We've been sifting through all the news and research so you don't have to. Think of us as your friendly neighborhood explainers.
Okay, so today we've got a real roller coaster. First, we're going to break down the latest in the U.S.-China trade war saga. Is there, like an end in sight?
Then we'll look at why one guy in Taiwan, Zheng-yuan, is super confident that China's going to win big. Spoiler alert. It's complicated.
Right. And finally, we'll dive into the internal debates happening in Taiwan itself about their relationship with China and, what that might mean for their future. So grab your favorite drink and let's get started.
Let's do it.
Okay, let's jump right into this U.S.-China trade war. So Trump was supposed to say something big about tariffs on semiconductors on Monday, April 14th, 2025. But nothing. Zilch.
Yeah, total silence on that front. Instead, he kind of hinted that he might give car makers a break on tariffs.
A break? My buddy keeps asking me if he should sell his Toyota stock. What's the deal with that?
Well, interestingly, even the suggestion of tariff relief for car makers seemed to give their stocks a bit of a bump. You can see why, right?
Yeah, lower tariffs mean lower costs.
Exactly. Lower costs for companies like Toyota and Ford. And that could potentially lead to higher profits. Maybe.
Right. Got to keep those SUV prices somewhat reasonable, I guess. Yeah. But then this is where it gets really interesting. Trump also threw out there that he might exempt Apple iPhones from tariffs. Now, that got my attention. I'm due for an upgrade.
Aren't we all? But yeah, that's a huge potential move.
So what kind of ripple effect could that have for our tech friends in Taiwan?
Well, if we look at the bigger picture, an iPhone tariff exemption could be a significant positive for Taiwanese businesses and Apple's supply chain. Taiwan makes a ton of crucial components.
Right, the guts of the phone.
Exactly. If the final iPhones aren't slapped with tariffs entering the U.S., that could ease pressure on those Taiwanese companies. However, and this is a big however, the U.S. Trade Representative has indicated that electronics, including smartphones and laptops, are still under review. They could still face tariffs.
So no guarantees.
Plus, Trump himself has made conflicting statements, suggesting nobody gets a free pass, especially China, so it's still very much, up in the air.
So it's like a maybe yes, maybe no situation.
Yeah.
Got it. Now, I remember reading something about a 90-day timeout on tariffs for most other countries besides China. What's the story there?
Yes, that 90-day delay kicked in after April 9th, 2025.
Is that actually helping to keep inflation in check right now?
It's definitely having an impact on the immediate inflation picture. By postponing the higher tariffs on goods from those other countries, the direct price increase for consumers is somewhat limited. Short term, anyway.
For now.
For now, only the base 10% tariff is in effect.
Okay, so a little bit of a pause button on price hikes for now. But I also heard some talk about deflation maybe happening in the first half of 2025.
Yeah.
How could prices go down with all this tariff stuff looming?
That's a really interesting point. There was actually a lot of overstocking of goods earlier in 2025.
Like companies bought too much stuff.
Basically, yeah. Think of it. Yeah. Businesses bought a ton, expecting high demand. If that demand doesn't fully materialize, they end up with warehouses full of products.
And you got to sell it cheap.
Exactly. To get rid of that excess inventory, they might have to lower prices. That's deflationary pressure. This could temporarily balance out some of the inflationary effects we might see later when those higher tariffs eventually kick in, probably late 2025, early 2026.
It's this back and forth.
Makes predicting the economy so darn complicated.
Yeah, it feels like trying to predict the weather 6 months out. Now, what about those industries like textiles and furniture? Are they just going to have to swallow the cost of these tariffs?
Well, for sectors like textiles, furniture, plastics, especially those facing a lot of competition from places like Vietnam, Indonesia, Mexico.
Mid-range stuff.
Right. Their ability to just raise prices to cover tariffs is probably pretty limited. If they get too expensive, consumers will just buy from competitors who aren't facing the same tariff hit.
That makes sense. I'm not going to pay extra for a T-shirt just because of some trade dispute. Now, you mentioned that electronics components are really important when we talk about inflation. Why is that?
Well, here's a key point.
Yeah.
If the prices of electronic components, those little chips and circuits and everything from your phone to your car, if those don't go up, it makes it much harder for a widespread wave of inflation to really take hold later this year.
Yeah.
These components are in so many products, their price stability can act as a significant, brake on overall inflation.
Okay, back to the iPhone saga. Do you think they'll actually get this tariff exemption? I mean, the U.S. has a massive trade deficit with China, right? Something like almost $300 billion.
You're absolutely right. It's huge. $295.4 billion. And electronics could easily account for more than half of that.
Wow.
So any decision about tariffs on something as popular as the iPhone has major implications for that trade balance.
All right, so where are all these iPhones and other gadgets even made? Because I know Apple has factories all over the place. Where they're made even matter when it comes to tariffs?
Oh, it matters a lot. Let's break down Apple's production a bit. Around 85% of iPhones are currently assembled in China.
Still 85%. Okay.
Yeah, makes it really tough to shift production quickly for current models like the i16. MacBooks are about 75% in China, so a little more flexibility there. Maybe move some to India.
And AirPods, I heard they moved.
Mostly, yeah. Around 90% in Vietnam now. That makes them the easiest to shift away from China if tariffs hit hard.
Okay.
But Apple Watches, 100% China. iPads, 95% China.
So mostly still China, except AirPods.
Pretty much. Right now, it looks like only AirPods production could be moved relatively easily. We might see changes for future iPhones, the i17 maybe, and other stuff, but it's not like flipping a switch, you know?
Wow, so China's still the king when it comes to putting all these gadgets together. I remember hearing about companies trying to move supply chains after 2018, but it sounds like it was mostly the simpler stuff.
Exactly. There have been some shifts, especially in less complex manufacturing, but China still dominates the assembly of more sophisticated electronics. Like laptops, they still handle about 70–80% of global assembly.
And what about India? Everyone talks about India being the next big thing. Are they really ready to step up?
India is definitely growing in importance, but there's still a gap in factory efficiency compared to China. Labor costs are lower in Vietnam, maybe half to two-thirds of China's, but China holds on to production because their factories are just more efficient.
Like Taiwan with chips?
Kind of, yeah. They're just really good at it.
Yeah.
Now, geopolitical pressure is pushing companies towards India, even if it means maybe lower efficiency short term.
Right.
We're seeing big players like Foxconn, who assemble tons of Apple stuff, increasing investments in India, a new huge site in northern India, probably at Apple's request.
But are they as good there?
Well, their track record for efficiency in India hasn't quite matched their China operations yet.
So maybe cheaper labor, but you get what you pay for in output.
Got it. Now, what are the actual tariff rates on these gadgets from China right now? It's all so confusing.
It is a bit of a tangled web. Right now, smartphones, smartwatches face a base tariff of 10%.
Okay.
However, if they're made in China, that rate jumps to 20% because of Section 301 tariffs, EPA stuff, China's retaliatory tariffs. It all adds up.
20%. Okay, that's why Foxconn is looking elsewhere.
That's a major driver, yeah. They have to seriously consider where they assemble things.
Okay, so it sounds like Trump is trying to keep consumers happy with potential brakes on cars, maybe iPhones, to avoid a big inflation spike before elections.
It's plausible, yeah. But he's still aiming those long-term tariffs and origin checks at key tech sectors to try and force companies to move supply chains away from China and East Asia. Am I getting that right?
That's a pretty solid summary of the likely strategy. Balancing short-term political needs with the longer-term goal of reshaping global supply chains.
And you mentioned the USMCA, the Mexico-Canada deal. That makes Mexico look better.
Definitely. Compared to Southeast Asia or India, Mexico's proximity and that trade agreement make it a more appealing option for companies wanting to move production closer to the U.S.
Right. Shorter shipping, maybe less risk. Makes sense. Now, what about Taiwan, Japan, and Europe? They're all in the tariff mix too, right?
They are indeed. The U.S. is in trade negotiations with all three. Most East Asian countries are in phase 1 of these talks.
In Taiwan, how are they feeling?
Taiwan's government is being pretty cautious. They're predicting a potential decline in industrial exports to the U.S. could impact around 5% of manufacturing output, maybe 125,000 jobs.
Oof. Depends on the sector, I guess.
Exactly. Depends on the final tariff rates for electronics, machinery, transport. Agriculture looks particularly vulnerable, potential 30% tariffs.
30%?
Yeah, making Taiwanese tea, tilapia, mahi-mahi much less competitive against imports from, say, the UK, Brazil, Ecuador. Yeah. Only really strong brands, like maybe their pineapples, might hold up.
That's gotta hurt.
We're talking potentially hundreds of millions in increased export costs for things like orchids, tea, edamame, fish. It's a significant hit.
Ouch. But then I saw the surprising headline, Taiwan's exports in March 2025 actually hit a record high, almost $50 billion. What's going on there?
Yeah, that record, $49.57 billion in March, 17 straight months of year-over-year growth. It strongly suggests companies were
rushing to ship before tariffs hit.
Exactly. A pre-tariff inventory buildup seems likely. We saw particularly strong growth in mid to lower stream goods, the components, the materials.
So a last-minute dash. But then Taiwan's finance ministry put out a much more conservative forecast for April. Why the difference?
Well, their forecast, $37.4 to $39.3 billion for April, only 3.4% growth. It might not have fully factored in this ongoing stockpiling rush.
You think April will be higher?
Given continued U.S. demand, especially for high-tech like communication products showing strong growth, I wouldn't be surprised if April exports beat their prediction, maybe even exceed the 2024 monthly average.
Makes sense. Inflated numbers short term.
Yeah.
And you mentioned something wild about exports to Mexico.
Absolutely. Exports to Mexico saw a massive, get this, 237.5% year-over-year increase in the first 3 months of 2025.
Oh. 237%.
Yeah. It's a super clear sign of companies trying to bypass potential tariffs elsewhere, get goods closer to the U.S. market before that 90-day window closes. Apple suppliers, Dell, Quanta, they're all setting up or expanding in Mexico.
Okay, so strong export orders driving things right now. But I also heard rumblings about the stock market maybe taking a hit because of all this uncertainty. How does that make sense? Good orders, bad market.
It does create a bit of a strange situation. Strong export orders are usually good, right? They drive imports of raw materials, like we saw with Taiwan's record imports in March.
Yeah.
Typically, after orders decline, you expect a big restocking and a market recovery. But the current uncertainty around tariffs is causing market corrections despite strong orders.
Geopolitics messing things up.
Exactly. Geopolitical factors can override traditional economic signals. This might actually be an opportunity for listeners, think about investments. Maybe take advantage of market dips caused by unpredictable policies.
So good news on the economy itself, but maybe a bumpy stock market ride.
Got it. And companies are diversifying globally, not just India and Mexico.
That's right. Broader trend. Foxconn and others expanding there, sure. But some are even planning new facilities in the U.S., though that seems more about short-term political pressure. Most manufacturing still overseas.
And what about the cost? Are companies eating these tariffs, or are we going to see higher prices?
Well, in sectors where demand isn't very price sensitive, high-end gaming graphics cards from NVIDIA, yeah, gamers will pay anything.
Pretty much. We're already seeing direct price hikes for tariffs there. Sony raised PS5 prices in various regions, more expected in the U.S. after 90 days. This suggests inflation could become a bigger market focus again.
So inflation's back on the table. Now, here's a weird one. The new Taiwan dollar. Surprisingly strong lately, right? Even with companies maybe pulling money back to the U.S.
Interestingly, yeah. Its strength seems mainly due to a short-term weakening of the U.S. dollar, and maybe Taiwanese investors selling USD to cover stock market losses recently.
Not necessarily foreign money pouring in?
Probably not big foreign investment driving it right now, no.
Interesting. But there was some good news on wages. Taiwanese workers finally getting ahead of inflation.
Yes, definitely a positive sign. In February 2025, real wages, regular monthly salary finally outpaced inflation, reached NT $47,296, up 3.02% year over year.
Nice.
Plus, record high overtime hours and pay. Points to strong short-term fundamentals for the Taipei stock market, but the question remains whether those strong orders will continue.
Small victories. Yeah. Now, really quickly, what's happening with Japan and Europe and all this trade drama? Are they just sitting back?
Oh, no way. Japan's facing some pretty tough resistance in its U.S. trade talks. America's pushing hard for Japan to dismantle non-tariff barriers.
Like what?
Cars, their independent safety standards, EV subsidies, rice import restrictions, limits on specific beef cuts, plus demands to open markets for pork, wheat, food additives, leather, footwear, IP, postal service, insurance, education, digital. It's a long list.
Wow, they want everything.
It's causing a lot of pushback within Japan, slowing things down. The EU is also in talks, started a new round April 14th. And get this.
Yeah.
They're surprisingly considering re-importing Russian natural gas to avoid inflation from trade war fallout.
Really? Even with Ukraine?
Yeah, despite the ongoing terrible situation there. And we're also seeing this interesting dip in U.S. tourism in several European countries, maybe a subtle pushback.
So everyone's feeling the heat, talks are complex. Summing up part one. Trump's using uncertainty to pressure China, bring supply chains home, playing hardball with allies to get concessions, maybe easing up later, volatile markets ahead.
That's a good, concise way to put it. The uncertainty itself is a key part of the strategy.
Yeah. All right, let's shift gears. Let's talk about this guy, Zheng-yuan, former legislator in Taiwan, known for being pretty pro-China, right?
That's putting it mildly, yes. He has very strong pro-China views.
And he actually thinks China is going to win this trade war, that the U.S. will back down. Walk us through his arguments.
Okay. Zheng-yuan is definitely a well-known figure, long history of these stances. His core argument is about China's fundamental economic strengths versus what he sees as U.S. weaknesses.
Okay, argument number one, why will China win?
First, he points to China's economic resilience. High savings rate, massive domestic market. He contrasts that with the U.S. overly dependent on consumer spending, low savings, more vulnerable to tariff price hikes.
So China can just buy its own stuff if exports drop.
That's his thinking, yeah. He believes their internal demand provides a significant cushion.
Interesting theory. What's the second point? The trump card.
Right, his second point, service trade. He argues the U.S. has a big trade surplus in services with China. Think NBA broadcasting rights, Tencent paying $300 million a year just for that, plus NFL, MLB, Hollywood.
Okay.
His argument is, if China restricted access for U.S. entertainment and sports, it would really hurt profitable U.S. sectors and pressure the U.S. government.
Huh. Hadn't really considered the services angle like that. Okay, his third argument.
Third claim. U.S. tariffs hurt America more than China. He uses the iPhone example again. China's profit, Foxconn's assembly fee is small, maybe NT $2,500 per phone.
Right.
But U.S. brands like Apple bear the tariff cost, hurting competitiveness. He thinks U.S. reliance on Chinese goods means tariffs just mean higher prices for Americans, inflation, market chaos.
So we're basically shooting ourselves in the foot. That's a strong take. What about China selling U.S. debt? Is that a weapon they have?
This is his fourth point, and he actually downplays that. He argues China's $760 billion in U.S. debt is only about 2% of the total $35 trillion U.S. debt.
Only 2%, okay.
So he thinks any selling has limited impact. Plus, he notes China didn't aggressively sell during low rates in 2022 amid the Ukraine war, suggesting caution. He thinks the U.S. exaggerates China's influence to deflect from domestic issues.
Interesting perspective. So not the big threat some make it out to be, according to him. And finally, his big prediction. When does China win?
His bold prediction. China wins, U.S. abandons high tariffs within 90 days. Due to internal pressure, potential bond market collapse, he sees Trump's shifting policies as weakness, instability.
Wow, 90 days. He sounds pretty convinced. Now, you mentioned he's known for being pro-China. What's his background? Does that color his analysis?
It definitely does. Long documented history of pro-China views. Former KMT legislator, that party traditionally favors closer ties. He has a PhD from Tsinghua University in Beijing.
Okay, a Beijing PhD.
Yeah. His opinions are often controversial in Taiwan, where views on China vary widely. And his views tend to get amplified by pro-China media outlets there, like CTI News.
So his confident prediction of a Chinese victory probably need to view that through the lens of his long-standing bias. Sounds like Taiwan itself has many different views on this.
Exactly. His strong belief reflects his perspective, and many in Taiwan would definitely question his objectivity.
Okay, that leads us perfectly into our next topic. The internal divisions within Taiwan itself when it comes to China. It's definitely not a unified view, is it?
Far from it. That's really the crucial question. Taiwan is split, and these divisions, pro-China, anti-China, somewhere in between, could significantly shape the island's future path.
So we've got this U.S.-China trade war potentially hurting both, maybe even the U.S. more in some ways.
Yeah.
How do Taiwan's internal divisions affect how they handle that?
Well, some research does suggest the U.S. could face a bigger economic hit due to import reliance, risk of supply disruptions, stagflation. China's savings and domestic demand might offer more resilience, but both likely suffer.
Right.
Long term, this could push towards decoupling, increased tensions, and Taiwan's internal divisions. They are playing out in things like the 2025 movement to recall pro-China legislators.
Trying to change the power balance.
Exactly. Shift power in the legislature, maybe give the ruling DPP more seats, make it easier to pass their policies. But this internal struggle could also create instability, make it harder for Taiwan to present a united front against pressure from China.
Right, a house divided.
Yeah.
What are some specific policy areas where these disagreements pop up?
Oh, fundamental stuff. Energy policy, nuclear versus renewables, that's a big one. Defense budget size and allocation. Overall government spending. The TPP party, for instance, favors nuclear, and they're critical of President Li's cross-strait stance.
And public opinion.
Polls show strong overall support for nuclear, especially among younger people. KMT voters overwhelmingly support it. DPP voters are more split. These divisions aren't just energy, they create political gridlock.
Gridlock? How bad is it?
Yeah, pretty significant right now. Split government, first time in 16 years. It's leading to a kind of judicial paralysis. The KMT and TPP are blocking appointments to the Constitutional Court.
Blocking judges.
Yeah, they raised the quorum needed for rulings to 10 out of 15 judges, but there are only 8 in place, so the court can't rule on important stuff.
Wow, that's a serious logjam. And it spills over into defense funding, too.
Exactly. There's a push in the legislature to give local governments a bigger slice of tax revenue from 25% up to 40%. That could limit funds for the national defense budget.
And people disagree on defense spending.
Public opinion's pretty divided on increasing the defense budget, and the legislature has actually frozen parts of it, operational expenses, the indigenous submarine project, drone parks, even military PR money.
While the U.S. is pushing them to spend more.
Right, echoing past Trump demands. So major disagreements on priorities impacting critical areas.
But it's not just about China, right? Broader issues dividing Taiwan.
Absolutely. Aging population, stagnant wages for many, rising housing prices, growing inequality. The semiconductor industry's dominance is a double-edged sword.
How so?
Huge globally. Big part of GDP. Employs a lot. But it also contributes to the wealth gap within Taiwan.
So President Lai Ching-te has a really tough job navigating all this.
He certainly does. Needs to build consensus in his own party, compromise with the opposition to break the stalemate. How he manages this affects the 2026 local elections, 2028 presidential election. Big stakes.
And these recall efforts against legislators, who are they targeting?
The 2025 recalls, approved by the Election Commission in Feb, target 19 legislators. Includes prominent KMT figures seen as pro-China, like Fu Kenqi. Academic groups are involved too, arguing some KMT actions are undemocratic.
And recalls are easier now.
Yeah, a 2016 law change lowered the threshold. There have been 3 successful recalls since 2017, suggesting the public is more willing to use this tool.
So the public is making its voice heard. But is everyone on board with these recalls?
Not at all. Significant controversy. Former DPP Premier Su Tseng-chang warned it could create a vicious cycle, hurting Taiwan's development.
What do polls say?
Polls show the public is divided. One poll found 57% think the recall movement does more harm than good. Another showed 53% dissatisfied with recent budget cuts. So public opinion is split, which could affect support for future policies.
So wrapping up part 3, U.S.-China trade war is the external pressure. Taiwan's internal divisions, like these recalls, could shake up their politics. And fundamental disagreements on energy, defense, continue to shape their future. Really complex.
It is indeed. The interaction between external pressures and internal dynamics creates a very complex, uncertain path forward for the island.
Well, folks, we have definitely gone down the rabbit hole today. We've looked at the shifting sands of the U.S.-China trade war, how it could hit everything from cars to phones.
We heard one perspective from Taiwan, maybe a bit biased, pretty confident about China's chances.
Right. And we navigated the tangled web of Taiwan's own internal divisions and how those might steer its future. It's a lot to digest.
It certainly is. And it really makes you think, how these massive global shifts and internal currents in a place like Taiwan can ripple out and affect all of us, maybe in ways we don't even realize yet. Definitely something to keep an eye on.
Absolutely. Some serious food for thought right there. Well, if you managed to stay awake through all that brainy stuff, you deserve a medal. Seriously, though, if you found this deep dive interesting, maybe go check out our buddy Micky's YouTube channel, Mickytolife. He's got some fun stuff over there to help you unwind.
Definitely a good place for a bit of a mental palate cleanser after all that.
Yeah.
All right, everyone, that's all the time we've got for this deep dive. Until next time, stay informed and stay curious.